Diana Miller had always thought of her life as predictable. From her steady job at the library to her husband Martin's reliable schedule at the accounting firm, everything seemed to follow an orderly rhythm. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, and Diana took comfort in that. Little did she know, subtle cracks had begun to form in the foundation of their seemingly perfect life, and these cracks would soon widen into chasms she couldn't ignore. 2 months before the incident, Martin had started working late more often. His explanations seemed logical enough: quarterly reports, a demanding client, or training new hires. But Diana noticed the strain in his eyes when he came home, the stiffness in his hugs, and the absence of the laughter they used to share. She wanted to ask if something was wrong, but the words never seemed to come out right. Dallas, their daughter, was also feeling the strain of her own life. Balancing her final year at university with a part-time job and living at home to save money wasn't easy. While she loved her parents, their quiet tensions were becoming harder to ignore. One night, after a particularly awkward family dinner, Dallas overheard her father on the phone in his office. His tone was low and somber, unlike the usual calm confidence she associated with him. Though she couldn't make out the words, it left her uneasy. Around the same time, Diana found an old photo album tucked away in a closet while searching for winter clothes. Flipping through the pictures of vacations, birthdays, and anniversaries, she felt a pang of longing for the connection she and Martin once shared. Determined to reignite their bond, she planned a surprise weekend getaway, only to have him decline due to a critical meeting at work. Martin's struggles were not as straightforward as he let on. A year earlier, he had been involved in a minor car accident while carpooling with colleagues. Though the physical injuries were negligible, the emotional toll lingered. Sleepless nights became a routine, and the growing pressure at work only added to his mental fatigue. He had seen a doctor who dismissed his symptoms as stress-related, leaving him to navigate his turmoil alone. The night before the call, Diana had noticed Martin staring blankly at the family photo wall in their living room. When she asked what was on his mind, he simply shook his head and mumbled something about needing to get some fresh air. That was the last time she saw him before going to bed. Unbeknownst to her, Martin had driven away with no clear destination, his thoughts spiraling in directions he hadn't dared to acknowledge until then. It was an hour when no one should be making calls. Diana wasn't exactly sure of the time, but the incessant ringing of the phone at such a late hour was clearly out of place. Hoping against hope that it was Marty's phone and not hers, she pressed her face into the pillow, yelling, "Really? Thanks a lot," to the stillness of the room. The noise ceased after 5 insistent rings, prompting a wave of relief to wash over her. But just as she began to relax and adjust back into her comforting position, the unwelcome sound shattered the quiet once more. "Damn it!" Diana shouted, her frustration boiling over as her eyes flew open. She sat up, glaring into the darkness. "Martin, will you just answer the damn—" Her voice trailed off when she turned to find his side of the bed empty. She glanced at the glowing numbers on the clock, 3:37 a.m. Confused, she reached for her phone on the nightstand, her mind spinning with questions. Martin had been there when they went to sleep. Where could he have gone? A sudden vibration in her hand startled her. She answered the call groggily. "Hello? Is this Diana Miller?" a calm, unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes, it is," Diana replied, her irritation growing. "Who's calling?" "Are you the wife of Martin Miller?" the voice pressed. "Yes! For God's sake, who is this and what's going on?" Diana demanded, now fully awake. "This is the emergency room at Northtown Medical Center," the voice explained. "Your husband was brought in about an hour ago. We retrieved your contact information from the incident report." "A car accident?" Diana's voice trembled as dread washed over her. "Oh my God, is he all right?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," the caller said, their tone professional but firm. "I can't discuss his condition over the phone. We need you to come in immediately." "Yes, of course," Diana said, already scrambling to get out of bed. "I'm on my way." Diana bolted from her bed and rushed upstairs to her daughter's room. Dallas, who had been named after the city where she was conceived, was in her final year at a local university and lived at home to save money. She had once enjoyed the freedom of dorm life, but eventually chose the quieter environment of her family home to focus on her studies. "Dallas, wake up," Diana called softly, shaking her shoulder. No response. "Dal, wake up," she repeated, this time with more urgency, giving her shoulder another shake. Still nothing. "Dallas, wake up," Diana practically yelled. Startled, Dallas sat up groggily, blinking against the light her mother had just turned on. "Your dad's been in an accident," Diana said quickly. "He's in the ER. Get up and get dressed. We have to go now." Without hesitation, Dallas slid out of bed and began pulling on clothes, oblivious to her state of undress. Diana didn't notice either. She was too preoccupied rummaging through drawers to grab what her daughter might need. Once ready, they rushed out of the house and drove to the hospital. The normally short 10-minute drive felt endless as Dallas bombarded her mother with questions she couldn't answer. When they arrived, a nurse directed them to Martin's room. The sight of him hit them like a blow. He was covered in bandages, unconscious, and hooked to monitors. A nurse handed Diana some paperwork to fill out, a harsh reminder that even in moments of crisis, administrative tasks never wait. Dallas moved a chair close to her father's bed, her face pale with worry. About an hour later, 2 police officers entered the room, a man and a woman, both in uniform. "Good evening, ma'am," the woman began, her tone professional but sympathetic. "I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were the first responders at the scene." Diana stood, her anxiety evident. "Do you know how he's doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. She gestured toward the young woman at her side. "No one's told us anything yet." "Oh, and this is my daughter, Dallas." Officer Stanton shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have any updates on his condition," she said. "We're here to ask a few questions. I know this is a difficult time, but it's important we gather information as soon as possible." Diana hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." "Do you have any idea why your husband might have been out so late?" Stanton asked. "No," Diana said firmly, her expression resolute. "We went to bed together around 10 p.m. I had no idea he'd even left until the hospital called." Officer Stanton turned to Dallas. "Dallas, can you confirm that?" "Yes," Dallas replied, her voice steady but quiet. "We all watched a movie together, and then we went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bedroom with Mom." "What movie was it?" Stanton asked, her tone conversational but focused. Dallas hesitated, searching her memory. "Something with Keanu Reeves, an action movie." "It was Dad's pick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Stanton exchanged a glance with her partner before continuing. "Were there any issues at home recently? Financial struggles, marital problems?" "No," Diana said, shaking her head. "Nothing unusual, nothing serious." "Are you absolutely sure?" Stanton pressed. "Yes, I can't imagine why he'd leave without telling me." "Were there other people involved? Was anyone else hurt?" Diana asked anxiously. "That's the thing, ma'am," Stanton said carefully. "There wasn't another car involved. Witnesses saw your husband's vehicle suddenly accelerate before crashing head-on into a large oak tree at the corner of Highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks and no one reported seeing brake lights." Diana and Dallas froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances as the implications of Stanton's words became clear. "Are you suggesting my husband did this on purpose?" Diana asked, her voice cracking. "You think he tried to—" "We're considering all possibilities," Stanton said calmly. "We'll need to examine the car for mechanical issues and speak with your husband when he regains consciousness." "You're wrong," Diana said, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another explanation. Maybe he fell asleep or lost control. It was so late." Stanton placed her card on the table and told them to call if they remembered anything else. After the officers left, Dallas quietly shut the door. "You didn't tell them," Dallas said softly. "No," Diana replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "It's not their business. If your father chooses to say something, that's up to him. Until then, we wait." The following days dragged by at a snail's pace. Martin remained unconscious and under close observation in the hospital. Diana and Dallas spent as much time by his side as they could, ensuring he was never left alone. They often took turns keeping vigil, their focus entirely on Martin's recovery. Diana, who knew Martin's boss personally, made a call to inform him of the situation and that Martin would be unable to work for a while. She was careful with her words, avoiding anything that could hint at the possibility of a deliberate act. The accident had occurred late Saturday night, and it wasn't until Wednesday morning that Martin began showing signs of waking up. By midday, his eyes fluttered open, although his movements were limited. Diana, who was in the room at the time, noticed his eyes opening and rushed to his bedside to reassure him that everything would be okay. Moments later, a nurse hurried in, alerted by the monitors. Diana stepped back to give the nurse space, watching as more doctors arrived to assess Martin's condition. Taking the opportunity, she slipped out of the room to call Dallas and share the news. When her daughter didn't answer, Diana left a voicemail. As the day went on, much of the medical equipment attached to Martin was removed. Though his left arm was in a cast, his right-handedness meant it wouldn't hinder him too much. With his throat still sore from the breathing tube, he was provided with a whiteboard to communicate. He scribbled a message, and when the nurse read it, she paused to confirm with him. Martin nodded firmly. The nurse then stepped into the hallway, her expression serious. Moments later, she returned and approached Diana with an apologetic tone. "Mrs. Miller, I need to inform you that your husband has requested you and your daughter not be allowed back into his room." "What?" Diana's voice wavered in disbelief. "He's my husband. I have every right to be with him." "I'm sorry, but the patient's wishes take precedence," the nurse explained gently. "Let me speak to him. I'm sure we can work this out," Diana pleaded, trying to move past the nurse. When she was stopped, her desperation turned into shouting. "Martin! Martin, please talk to me. What's going on? Martin!" "Mrs. Miller," the nurse said firmly, "please stop yelling. You're disturbing other patients. You may wait outside, but if you try to enter the room again or continue making noise, we'll have to ask you to leave the building. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, I understand," Diana muttered, defeated. She sank into a chair outside the room, her head in her hands. About 45 minutes later, Dallas arrived at the hospital and found her mother sitting in the hallway, looking distraught. "Mom, what are you doing out here?" Dallas asked. "Your father doesn't want either of us in the room," Diana replied quietly. "Us?" Dallas repeated, confused. "I mean, I get why he'd ban you, but why me?" Diana's head snapped up. "What the hell is that supposed to mean? And why did it take you so long to get here?" Dallas hesitated. "Well, Bradley came over to check on me, and we're kind of—" "God, don't tell me you were with your boyfriend while your father's in the hospital," Diana interrupted, her voice sharp. Dallas shrugged. "He was unconscious when I left, and I needed to relax. It's been stressful, okay? For what it's worth, you might want to consider doing the same." "I don't want to hear it, Dallas," Diana said, her tone icy. "Let's not discuss this right now. It's inappropriate." Dallas smirked at the irony, but said nothing. Their tense conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, polished brunette. She wore professional attire, though her badge indicated she wasn't a doctor. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the woman said as she entered Martin's room. "I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the mental health specialists here. How are you feeling today?" "As well as can be expected," Martin replied, his voice still raspy but steady. 9 days had passed since the accident, and Martin had regained the ability to speak. The whiteboard was no longer needed, though his questions about when he could be discharged were met with vague answers. "The hospital asked me to check in with you," Dr. Lassiter continued. "Do I have a choice?" Martin asked, his tone resigned. "Not if you're hoping to go home soon," she replied with a wry smile. "Shall we begin?" Dr. Lassiter pulled a chair closer to his bed, crossing her legs as she reviewed his file. After a few moments, she looked up. "You were admitted here following a collision with a tree. I also see that you've restricted visits from your wife and daughter. I can't help but wonder if there's a connection." Martin nodded slightly. "She cheated on me." Dr. Lassiter sighed softly. "Infidelity is unfortunately common, though it doesn't usually lead to something as extreme as this. Is there more to the story?" Martin sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as if searching for the words he didn't want to say. The silence stretched for minutes. He hated discussing his feelings, especially with an attractive woman. The thought crossed his mind, couldn't they have sent an older man for this? But Dr. Lassiter waited patiently, her calm demeanor betraying no irritation. She had seen this hesitation countless times before. Eventually, her patience paid off. "I think I've been dealing with depression," Martin finally admitted. "Not officially diagnosed or anything, but it's been hanging over me for a while." "Do you know what triggered it? Or has it just been a general feeling?" Dr. Lassiter asked gently. He hesitated again, then sighed. "I couldn't get in boner. It started about a year after an accident." She nodded, encouraging him to continue without judgment. "Go on." "It wasn't even a bad accident," Martin explained. "I was in the back seat. My boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. Someone rear-ended us. There wasn't much damage, no airbags deployed, nothing serious. But I wasn't braced for it, and I hit my head on the seat in front of me. That's where it all started, I think." Dr. Lassiter glanced at her notes and spoke evenly. "The report mentions a mild concussion." The man across from her nodded. "Yeah, my doctors ran every test you could imagine. They even repeated some. No one could pinpoint the exact cause. The best explanation I got was that something happened. Some part of my brain was damaged, and it affected, well, that." Dr. Lassiter leaned forward slightly, her tone probing but empathetic. And that led to difficulties in your marriage, she said, piecing the story together. Your wife wasn't satisfied with your bed life, which eventually led to her having an affair. Am I right? In a nutshell, yeah, he replied, his voice subdued. How long after the accident did this start? She asked. 7 or 8 months, maybe. We tried to work around it using, certain aids. He paused, embarrassed. I understand, Mr. Miller. No need to explain further, she said with a small smile. At first it seemed fine, Martin continued, his voice quieter. We thought it would be temporary, that I'd eventually recover. We used to talk about how, once I was better, we'd spend a whole weekend in bed together. Just the two of us. But that day never came. And after a while, she decided to meet her needs elsewhere. Did she discuss it with you beforehand? Dr. Lassiter asked, her tone measured. Martin shook his head, his voice tinged with bitterness. No. I found out by accident, came home from work early one day. Total cliché, I know. She was in our bedroom with him, and my daughter and her boyfriend were there too. Dr. Lassiter raised her eyebrows, surprised. Were they together? No, thank God, Martin replied quickly. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, and Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I found out. My wife was cheating on me, and my daughter not only knew about it, but seemed fine with it. Dr. Lassiter leaned back, processing his words. That explains why your daughter isn't allowed in the room either, she said thoughtfully. Yeah, Martin confirmed, his expression darkening. Oh, and Bill? He's Brad's father. We knew him before, just as Brad's dad. I later found out it was Dallas who suggested Bill to Diana. That was another blow. Did you confront them? Dr. Lassiter asked. Not really, Martin admitted, letting out a sharp breath. If Dallas hadn't been there, I probably would have confronted Diana. But I'd already seen enough of my daughter's anatomy that day, so I just left. Dr. Lassiter's expression softened, but she pressed on. And when you finally spoke to your wife? She didn't deny it, Martin said, his voice heavy with resignation. She said she was sorry, I knew, but made it clear she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. Her argument was simple. If I couldn't meet her needs, she had the right to find someone who could. And she wanted someone consistent, not random flings. Bill was single, so he fit the bill, no pun intended. Dr. Lassiter gave a small nod, her voice gentle. How did that make you feel? What could I say? Martin shrugged bitterly. She wasn't wrong. I couldn't give her what she needed. It wasn't her fault, and I didn't blame her for wanting a normal bed life. But it still hurt. If she'd asked your permission beforehand, would you have agreed? Dr. Lassiter asked. I've thought about that a lot, Martin admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. Part of me wants to say yes, because I loved her and wanted her to be happy, but I don't think I could have handled it. We made vows, in sickness and in health. I wouldn't have done that to her, and it eliminated me that she did it to me. Dr. Lassiter nodded, her tone calm but probing. And after you found out? Martin sighed, his frustration evident. She stopped hiding it. Before, it was only during the day when I was at work. After I knew it included weekends, trips to the store, she was with him more openly. That must have been incredibly difficult, Dr. Lassiter said gently, her expression sympathetic. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it, Martin said bitterly. But I didn't see what else I could do. She deserved happiness, and I couldn't provide it. It ate away at me. Dr. Lassiter leaned forward slightly. Tell me about the night of the accident. Martin exhaled slowly. We watched a movie as a family. I kept my feelings bottled up. I thought it was better not to burden them with my pain. They said goodnight. Diana kissed me. Dallas hugged me. But I realized Dallas didn't respect me anymore. Not as a father or a man, and I couldn't blame her. I didn't respect myself either. He paused before continuing. I got ready for bed, same as always. Diana fell asleep. I waited, then got dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went upstairs. I looked in on Dallas. She was asleep. I blew her a kiss and whispered goodbye. Then I got in my car. And? Dr. Lassiter prompted gently. I didn't have a specific plan, Martin admitted. I drove aimlessly at first. Then I remembered the big oak tree. I drove past it once, then circled back. It was perfect. No obstacles, a clear path. I floored it and aimed straight for it. The room fell silent, as both Martin and Dr. Lassiter absorbed the weight of his story. After a moment, she spoke. Mr. Miller, thank you for trusting me with this. It's not easy to share something so deeply personal. I'd like to come back tomorrow to continue our conversation, if that's all right. Martin smirked faintly. I'm not going anywhere. After shaking hands with Dr. Lassiter, Martin watched her leave the room. He picked up his phone, which Diana had brought from home, despite his earlier instructions not to. Sorting through messages and emails, he replied to a few, including one to his boss to share an update on his condition. Then, setting the phone aside, he closed his eyes, hoping for some much-needed rest. Back at home, Diana wrestled with her thoughts. She convinced herself that Martin was okay with her relationship with Bill, that he had tacitly accepted it as an act of love, a way to make her happy. When she first learned about the crash, she doubted it was an accident, but now she was less sure. Diana suspected the police might have questioned Martin, though she hoped he hadn't mentioned Bill. Not that it mattered much. Infidelity wasn't a crime. Perhaps the authorities had chalked the crash up to a failed self-destruction attempt and moved on. Case closed. Still, Martin had never outwardly objected, had he? If he had, she couldn't recall. And she wasn't about to give up her personal life just because of a freak accident. Celibacy wasn't what she signed up for, and she wasn't about to accept it now. Once Martin was home, she decided she'd tread more carefully, perhaps tone down her meetings with Bill, but she wouldn't end the relationship entirely. The next morning, Dr. Lassiter returned as promised. Martin noticed her more casual outfit, but couldn't summon much interest. He gave her a polite nod as she entered. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Miller?" she asked with a warm smile. "About the same as yesterday, Doc," Martin replied with a faint shrug. "I'd love to go home, but I guess that's not up to me." Dr. Lassiter offered a reassuring smile. "Well, partially. State law requires a 72-hour hold after incidents like yours. The clock started with our conversation yesterday, so you've got about 2 days left." "That's fine, Doc. The food here isn't terrible, so I'll survive," Martin said with a small chuckle. They shared a brief laugh. "It's good to see you joking," Dr. Lassiter said. "That's a positive sign." "I think so too," Martin said, nodding. "It's been a while since I felt like myself. Months, really. I used to be a jokester, always teasing Dallas. It drove her nuts." Dr. Lassiter tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Have you had any darker thoughts since our last conversation? Any lingering regrets?" Martin shook his head. "Not really, Doc. The depression has lifted a bit. It's been replaced by anger and disappointment, mostly with Diana, a little with Dallas, but mostly with myself. I let things go too far. I never stood up for myself, never told Diana her behavior was unacceptable." Dr. Lassiter met his gaze steadily. "Do you plan to take that stand now?" "Absolutely," Martin said firmly. "As much as I've thought about divorce, I have to admit I bear some responsibility for letting her walk all over me. If she agrees to stop seeing Bill, I'm willing to go to counseling and work on our marriage." Dr. Lassiter tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's a significant shift in perspective. It's rare to see such a quick turnaround." Martin shrugged. "I had a lot of time to think while lying here before we talked. Being able to share my feelings with you helped me sort through them. I'm grateful for that." "Good to hear, Mr. Miller. I think we've made excellent progress. I'll check in with you tomorrow, but I don't see any reason why you can't be discharged as planned." "Thanks, Doc. I'm looking forward to getting out of here." When Martin was finally discharged, Diana and Dallas were there to take him home. Determined to turn over a new leaf, Martin decided to act as though things were already changing, even if they weren't quite there yet. The next week passed uneventfully. The airbags had done their job during the crash, and aside from a concussion that left him sensitive to light and sound, Martin's injuries were manageable. The TV stayed off, and soft music played quietly in the background as he rested. Diana and Dallas seemed eager to help, doting on him whenever he needed something. For a brief moment, things felt almost normal. Then, one afternoon, Diana announced casually, "I need to go shopping." "No," Martin said calmly, his tone steady but firm. Diana blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Martin repeated. "If we need something, make a list and Dallas can go." Dallas, lounging nearby, frowned. "Why are you dragging me into this?" she protested. "I have plans with Bradley." "Then you'd better finish quickly," Martin replied evenly, turning his attention back to Diana. "Diana, the list!" Diana's face hardened. "This is ridiculous. You can't just come home and start making demands. Dallas has plans, and I always do the shopping. That's final." Martin's expression darkened, his voice cutting through the room. "Do you think I don't know these shopping trips are an excuse to see Bill?" Her face froze mid-protest. "What are you talking about?" she asked cautiously. "You've used groceries as a cover for too long, Diana," Martin said, his tone low but unrelenting. "I see it in your eyes when you look at me, or rather when you don't. I notice the extra makeup, the nicer clothes. It's obvious, and it stops now. Diana stared at him in shock, her composure slipping. Even Dallas glanced at her father, her expression a mix of surprise and grudging respect. "Marty, please," Diana said after a moment, her voice trembling. "We've talked about this before. I'll try to be more discreet, but I'm not giving him up. I have the right to a bed life, and I intend to keep it." Martin's jaw tightened, his voice heavy with hurt. So our vows meant nothing? In sickness and in health. Was that just empty words to you? "I'm sorry, but this isn't what I agreed to," Diana shot back. "It's not my fault you can't give me what I need. I've done nothing wrong. I'm going shopping, and yes, I'll see Bill. If you want to talk about it tonight, fine." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house fell silent. Dallas glanced at her father, who stood frozen in place. Without a word, Martin turned and walked to his bedroom, leaving the rest unsaid. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller felt a gnawing anxiety about her family's future. Her parents' marriage, once the stable center of her world, now seemed precariously close to collapse. Her father had never truly confronted her mother before, and despite their struggles, nothing as serious as this had ever come between them. Deciding that the situation was beyond her control, she wiped her tears, pulled herself together, and left to meet Bradley. Meanwhile, Diana was grappling with conflicting feelings. A part of her hoped Martin would never fully recover, knowing deep down she might not be able to give up Bill. Bill was everything Marty wasn't: forceful, unyielding, and unapologetically direct. Marty, on the other hand, was gentle, caring, and predictable, and yet it was that very tenderness that now felt stifling to her. As night fell, Dallas returned home and found her father lying in bed. A faint light spilled from the slightly open bathroom door, the dim glow casting soft shadows across the room. She realized he had left the bathroom light on because the lamps in his room were too bright. "Dad?" she called softly. Martin didn't turn to face her, but responded, "Dallas, I'm sorry." His voice caught her off guard, and she moved closer, noticing the weight in his tone. She stood in the doorway, tears welling in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Martin hesitated. Since learning of her role in facilitating Diana's affair, he had stopped using the affectionate nicknames he once called her. Even now, as he saw the tears in her eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if this was genuine or a calculated attempt to win his favor. Still, he decided to hear her out. Dallas stepped closer, standing at the foot of the bed. "I'm sorry for what I did, Dad. I thought I was helping Mom. She was so upset about everything you were going through. About how you couldn't—" She paused, her eyes meeting his. "You know, you couldn't." Martin nodded slightly, allowing her to continue. "Bradley's dad was going through the same thing after Mrs. Coyle died. He always talked about how lonely he was. I thought they could help each other. I never thought about how it would hurt you. I was just trying to make things easier for Mom." "Is that why you did it?" Martin asked, his voice cautious. He wasn't sure if this sudden confession was sincere, but he decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Yes," Dallas admitted, her voice cracking. "I thought I was helping. I didn't realize how much damage I was causing." For a moment, their eyes met, and Martin managed a faint smile. "It's over now, Dally. I won't let this happen again." "I hope so," she said, wiping her tears. "I need you, Dad. Are you going to divorce Mom?" "I haven't decided yet," Martin said honestly. "It depends on whether she's willing to end things with Bill. But don't say anything. If she changes, it has to be because she wants to, not because she's pressured." Dallas nodded. "Okay, Dad, I should head upstairs." "Oh, I broke up with Bradley tonight." Martin raised an eyebrow, surprised. He had never liked Bradley much, but hadn't expected this. "Why?" Dallas hesitated before answering. "Because my dad told me once that he wasn't good enough for me. And tonight, I realized he was right." "You were right, Dad, about a lot of things." A small smile spread across Martin's face. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of pride. Dallas leaned forward and hugged him tightly, a rare moment of closeness they hadn't shared in years. When they pulled apart, she smiled softly and left the room, heading upstairs. The sound of her bedroom door closing was soon followed by the familiar chirp of Diana's car unlocking. The warmth Martin had just felt was instantly replaced with a cold dread. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. A few moments later, Diana walked into the bedroom, her hair damp and her skin freshly scrubbed. Martin suspected she had showered at Bill's house, an effort, no doubt, to return home without lingering evidence of her infidelity. "Can you help with the groceries?" she asked, her tone casual. "Are there actually groceries?" Martin asked, sitting up slowly. Yes, Marty. I told you I went shopping, and I did. He followed her to the car, unloading the bags and placing them on the counter. As he unpacked, he noticed a glaring absence of perishable items. A receipt tucked into one of the bags caught his attention. It was time-stamped nearly 2 hours ago. First I went shopping, Diana said, as though reading his thoughts. Then I went to see Bill. Though he had expected as much, hearing her say it stung. Martin finished unpacking in silence and retreated to the bedroom, his mind racing. There was no point in arguing. It wouldn't change her behavior. Diana had made her intentions clear. Now, the next move was his. A few minutes later, Diana entered the bedroom, her tone softer. Did you want to talk? No, Diana, Martin said flatly. You've made your position very clear. Diana hesitated. She loved her husband. He was her best friend and the person she trusted most. But she didn't believe her need for closeness should be an issue given the circumstances. She hoped Martin would come to see it the same way. Sensing his resolve, she sighed and moved toward her closet. She had briefly considered rekindling some closeness with Martin, but tonight wasn't the night. By the time she returned, dressed for bed, Martin appeared to be asleep, or at least pretending to be. Diana climbed into bed, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. For now, they both remained in limbo, teetering on the edge of decisions that could either shatter their family or begin to rebuild it. The divorce was anything but smooth. Diana was enraged when the papers were served, and Marty, ever considerate, chose to have them delivered to the house while he spent the day with Dallas. After moving into the guest room next to Dallas's upstairs bedroom, Diana dug in her heels. She hired a fiercely aggressive attorney who pulled out all the stops, including an attempt to declare Marty mentally unfit, citing the incident with the tree as a self-destruction attempt. Anticipating such a move and believing it wise regardless, Marty had already begun seeing a well-regarded psychologist by the time the papers were filed. The psychologist's testimony that Marty was stable and no longer a self-destruction risk quickly dismantled that argument, and the judge sided with him. The legal battle might have dragged on indefinitely, but when Diana seemed ready to escalate further, Dallas stepped in. She confronted her mother, making it clear that Diana's actions had crossed a line. Mom, your needs don't outweigh the promises you made. Life isn't fair, but you vowed to stand by Dad even when it's hard. If you keep fighting this, it's going to ruin our relationship. Maybe forever. Faced with the prospect of losing both her husband and daughter, Diana reluctantly stopped contesting the divorce. The house was sold, and Marty agreed to several years of alimony, knowing the court would have ordered it anyway. Diana rented a 2-bedroom apartment near her job and resumed working full-time 8 months after the divorce was finalized. But the ordeal left her bitter, especially when Bill unceremoniously ended their relationship. Apparently, Bill had been seeing other women, and Diana's appeal diminished once she was no longer married. Dallas continued her studies, splitting her time between her parents' homes. Over time, Diana began to play the sufferer, repeatedly blaming Marty for the divorce. One evening, as Diana once again lamented, "If only he had been more understanding," Dallas lost her temper. "Did you ever think about Dad?" she shouted, silencing her mother. It was a Friday night, and Marty found himself walking into a dimly lit club around 10 p.m. He wasn't looking for anything serious, just a distraction. A few drinks, maybe a dance or two, and a chance to unwind. Settling at the bar, he ordered a rum and coke and scanned the crowd. His eyes landed on a woman at the far end of the bar. Something about her seemed familiar. She had long, dark brown hair, and her dress barely concealed her curves. An almost empty glass of wine sat in front of her. Curious, Marty studied her until recognition dawned. A small smile tugged at his lips as he picked up his drink and walked over. The woman noticed him as he approached. "Dr. Lassiter?" he said, testing the waters. She studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place him. For a moment, Marty thought he might have been mistaken. "I'm off duty," she said at last, a small smile playing on her lips. "Here, I'm just Vicky. But I think you've got me at a disadvantage." Marty chuckled, leaning back slightly. "It's been a while. You probably see far more patients than I see psychologists." "I'm usually better with names than faces," Vicky said with a playful challenge. "Test me." "Martin Miller," he said, watching her carefully. She paused, tilting her head in thought, and for a moment Marty was certain she wouldn't remember. But then her expression shifted, and a spark of recognition lit her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Miller," she said with a teasing grin. "An unfaithful wife and an unfortunate encounter with a tree, if I recall correctly." That's me, Marty replied, impressed. I can't believe you remember. It's been almost 2 years. Sometimes I get lucky, Vicky said with a shrug. She motioned to the empty seat beside her. Care to join me? Marty nodded, sliding onto the bar stool as he gestured for the bartender to refill their drinks. So, what brings you here tonight? He asked. Dating someone? I'm trying, Vicky replied, a playful glint in her eye. Really? I thought I remembered a pretty impressive ring on your finger. That was then, she said with a nonchalant shrug. The divorce was finalized not long after we spoke. My ex-husband had more in common with a 20-year-old cashier and her friends than with me. I couldn't convince him otherwise. Wow, Marty said, raising an eyebrow. Are they still together? She laughed lightly, shaking her head. You'd be surprised, Marty, but once the papers were signed, I stopped caring about Wayne's marital status. Fair enough, Marty said, smiling. And please, call me Marty, or Martin. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you? Vicky asked, her tone sly and teasing. Marty, he admitted with a grin. Well then, Marty, Vicky said, standing and offering her hand. Care to take me for a spin on the dance floor? With pleasure, he said. He asked the bartender to hold their drinks, then led Vicky by the hand to the dance floor. The music was upbeat, and they quickly fell into rhythm. 2 fast songs gave way to a slower one, and they stayed on the floor, moving closer. Vicky wrapped her arms around Marty's neck, and he placed his hands firmly on her back. As they swayed to the music, Marty couldn't help but notice the softness of her body and the faint, intoxicating scent of her perfume. When the song ended, Vicky leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. Martin, I'm tired of dancing, she whispered, but I'm also very lonely. Maybe you can help me with that. Marty didn't hesitate. He took her hand, led her back to the bar, and paid the tab. The bartender didn't seem surprised. Outside, they got into Marty's car. Vicky had arrived via Uber, which made the decision easy. Maybe I should have asked earlier, Marty said, glancing at her, but how much did you drink? It was my first glass of wine when you walked up. Why? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women, he said. Don't worry, she said with a warm smile. I know exactly what I'm doing, Martin. Martin pulled his car into the underground parking garage and guided Vicky to the elevator. She clung to his arm, and they exchanged several passionate kisses as they ascended to his floor. The tension between them was electric, and as soon as the door to his apartment clicked shut behind them, Vicky wasted no time. She grabbed the hem of her dress and pulled it over her head in one swift motion. Wow, Vicky, Martin said, his voice low with awe. You're stunning, she smirked. Thanks, Martin, but are you just going to stand there and stare? Absolutely not. Good. Then show me where your bedroom is. Taking her hand, Martin led her down the hallway. He felt a twinge of relief knowing Dallas was spending the weekend at her mother's place. I hope you've got rubbers, Vicky teased as they stepped into the room. Martin opened his nightstand drawer, revealing a small stash, which he placed on the nightstand. They didn't waste any time. For over an hour, the two of them lost themselves in each other, the chemistry undeniable. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Martin on his back and Vicky nestled against his side. The room was quiet, and they drifted in that comfortable space between wakefulness and sleep. Vicky stirred first, raising her head slightly. Martin, she murmured. He responded sleepily. I just remembered something from your story, she said, her voice curious. There was some mention of erectile dysfunction. Care to explain? Martin chuckled softly. Well, that's clearly no longer a problem. Vicky smiled but pressed on. What happened? A few months after the oak tree incident, Martin began, choosing his words carefully. I started feeling this odd tingling sensation. It reminded me of how people describe a paralyzed limb regaining feeling. It went on for weeks. Were you still married then? Vicky asked. Did you tell Diana? We were technically still married, but we'd been living apart for a while, Martin replied. And no, I didn't tell her. It wasn't her business at that point. Over the next several months, things started working again. Sporadic at first, but then more consistently. By 8 or 9 months, everything was back to normal. What did the doctors say? They were baffled, Martin admitted, shaking his head. They ran every test imaginable, compared scans from before and after, and couldn't find a definitive explanation. Their best guess was that the impact with the tree somehow reset something in my brain. But honestly, they didn't know for sure. Well, Vicky said with a sly smile, whatever the reason, I'm grateful. I hope you don't mind if I stay the night." "Not at all," Martin replied with a grin, "as long as there's more Zex in the morning, followed by breakfast." "Deal," Vicky said, settling back down against him. They drifted off to sleep, but before long, Martin stirred again, his voice soft in the darkness. "Vicky?" She replied sleepily. "Do you think you're ready for something serious? A real relationship?" There was a long pause, and Martin's heart sank as he worried he had overstepped. For a moment he thought she might get up and leave, but she stayed. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Can we talk about it in the morning?" "Of course," Martin said gently. "Good night, Vicky." "Good night, Martin," she replied, her tone warm and reassuring. Vicky woke first and let Martin sleep while she took a shower. She wandered into the kitchen and began searching for something to make for breakfast. Martin's question lingered in her mind. She hadn't been looking for anything serious, just some fun and companionship. But the truth was, she liked Martin a lot. For months, she'd told herself she didn't need a man in her life. But now she wasn't so sure. The smell of cooking woke Martin. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Vicky wearing his shirt from the night before and an apron she'd found in a closet. "I was going to invite you to breakfast," he teased. "Looks like you beat me to it." "You can take me to lunch," she quipped. "Go take a quick shower. Breakfast will be ready when you're done." 10 minutes later, Martin returned to find the table set with an omelet, sausages, and buttered toast. "I didn't even know I had sausages in the freezer," he said, sitting down. "They were buried," Vicky said with a grin. "I hope it's edible." Martin took a bite and smiled. "It's delicious." They ate quietly, chatting about trivial things. Afterward, Martin took charge of cleaning up while Vicky sat on the couch. When he finished, he turned to her. "Are you ready to talk now?" he asked. "Mostly," Vicky said, standing and holding out her hand. "But can we do it in the bedroom? I'll be more comfortable there." They sat on the bed facing each other, Vicky holding Martin's hands tightly. "Martin, I need to be honest with you. I think you're amazing, and I definitely like you, but there's something you should know." He nodded for her to continue. "My ex-husband didn't just leave me for a younger woman. The main reason was because I can't have children. He wanted kids, his own kids, and left to find someone who could give them to him. He refused to consider adoption. After the divorce, I felt like a failure." Martin squeezed her hands. "Vicky, I'm over 40. I have an adult daughter. I wouldn't mind kids, but it's not a deal breaker." She exhaled, relief softening her expression. "Thank you for saying that. One more thing. After my divorce, I wasn't in a good place. Losing my husband to someone half my age really shook my confidence. I started to feel old." "You're 37, Martin said gently. "You're not old." "I know," she said with a small laugh. "But at the time, I let myself believe it. I don't know if I'm ready for something serious, but I know I want to see where this could go." Martin smiled. That's all I needed to hear. They both chuckled softly, the tension in the room easing. "I used to feel incomplete," Vicky began, her voice steady but introspective. "It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel like a woman. How could I? When I couldn't have children. I know it's not logical, but that's how I felt back then. So I tried to prove to myself that I was still a woman, if not through motherhood, then through being desirable. I reinvented myself as Angela and started going home with men, most of them strangers. It was empowering at first, but eventually it felt self-destructive. I started seeing a therapist and slowed down, but it took time before I could stop entirely." Martin considered her words, choosing his next carefully. "Isn't that what you were doing last night?" he asked gently, making it clear he wasn't judging her. "You looked like you were on the prowl." Vicky smiled ruefully. "Yes, I suppose I was. I have needs, Martin, just like any woman. But I've become more selective. I only go home with someone when I feel a real connection. There are plenty of nights I return home alone and take care of things myself." "Well, I'm glad I passed the test," Martin said with a playful grin. "You did?" Vicky replied warmly. "And, to answer your earlier question, I'd like to explore where this might go, but I want to be honest about my past. I was fortunate. Despite my behavior, I never contracted anything. I've been tested regularly, and I can provide proof if it would help you feel comfortable. I don't need birth control, but I'd like us both to get tested and agree to exclusivity if we're going to move forward." Martin sat quietly, processing everything she had said. Vicky waited, her patience masking her nervousness. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said. "I know that couldn't have been easy. I think I owe you the same honesty. Our situations aren't so different." Vicky tilted her head, intrigued, as Martin continued. "After my divorce, I felt relieved at first, but then the depression hit. I couldn't see a future for myself. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, especially since my condition hadn't improved. My therapist suggested that as I aged, I might find women who valued companionship over physical closeness. But when my body started recovering, unexpectedly I might add, I felt the need to prove I was still a man. I went out looking for women, not to connect, but to validate myself." He sighed. "I wasn't very picky. Some of the women, well, let's just say I made some questionable choices. It caught up with me when I ended up with gonorrhea. That was a wake-up call. My doctor and therapist both helped me reassess my behavior. It's been years since I've been with anyone without protection, and I'd be happy to get tested for us." Vicky smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "So are we doing this, you and me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Absolutely," Martin replied with a grin. Over the next few months, Martin and Vicky's relationship grew stronger. They spent nearly every night together, splitting time between their homes. Vicky got along well with Dallas, and it seemed only a matter of time before they married. The inevitable confrontation with Diana happened about 3 months into their relationship. Martin and Vicky were at a club catering to a more mature crowd, enjoying drinks and conversation when Martin's expression abruptly changed. His smile faded as he looked past Vicky. She turned to follow his gaze and saw a familiar face heading their way, Diana. Diana approached the table with a smirk. Though the divorce had been finalized over a year ago, she still harbored bitterness. In her mind, she'd done nothing wrong beyond being too open about her affair. The fact that Martin had moved on only fueled her resentment. "Marty," Diana said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What a surprise." "Diana," Martin replied evenly, then turned to Vicky. "This is my ex-wife, Diana. Diana, this is Vicky." "Nice to meet you, Diana," Vicky said politely, her tone firm. "I've heard a lot about you." "Well, I've heard absolutely nothing about you," Diana retorted bitterly. "We're divorced, Diana," Martin said calmly. "It's been over a year. My life is no longer your concern. If you don't mind—" He left the implication hanging, inviting her to leave. "Oh, of course, Martin," Diana replied with mock sweetness. Then, turning to Vicky, she added, "But before I go, there's something you should know." "And what's that?" Vicky asked, arching an eyebrow. "You probably don't want to get too involved with him," Diana said smugly. "We divorced because he couldn't perform." Martin watched Vicky closely, curious how she would handle the situation. To his surprise, she suppressed a laugh and turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Is that true, Martin?" she teased. "I don't think you mentioned this." Martin shrugged. It was her moment to handle as she pleased. Diana's satisfaction evaporated when Vicky replied with a mischievous smile. "Well, if what I experienced last night wasn't real, then a real one would probably eliminate me." Diana's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? Marty, you're not saying it works now?" "Like a champion," Martin said evenly. "Just as good as ever." "How is that possible? Did the doctors find a cure?" Diana demanded, visibly flustered. "They think it just needed time to recover," Martin replied, his tone growing firmer. "If you'd been patient and honored our vows, we might still be married." Diana stood speechless for several moments before finally whispering, "I'm sorry, Marty. I was selfish and short-sighted. I ruined a good marriage." Without waiting for a response, Diana turned and left the club. Martin and Vicky watched her go, both feeling a twinge of pity. Then Martin turned back to Vicky. "Let's dance," he said softly. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. It wasn't the beginning of a new life. It was the continuation of one they had both fought to rebuild, together. In the years that followed, Martin and Vicky built a life together grounded in trust, healing, and mutual respect. Their shared experiences, marked by loss, recovery, and new beginnings, gave them a bond neither had anticipated but both deeply cherished. Martin found renewed purpose in his work and personal life, volunteering to mentor young professionals struggling with challenges like he once faced. Vicky, too, used her own journey as inspiration, leading seminars on resilience and emotional well-being. Together, they often joked that their love story began in a hospital room and blossomed under the most unlikely circumstances. Dallas thrived in her career, taking lessons from her parents' struggles to build a foundation of honesty in her own relationships. She became a bridge between her mother and father, ensuring that even as their paths diverged, the family remained connected in its own way. As for Diana, time softened the bitterness she once carried. Though she never found the same depth of connection Martin and Vicky shared, she gradually came to terms with her mistakes, finding solace in her role as a mother and a professional. On quiet evenings, Martin and Vicky often sat on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. In those moments, they didn't dwell on the past or worry about the future. They simply held hands, grateful for the second chance life had given them and the strength they found in each other. The oak tree still stood at the corner of Highways 121 and 288, a silent witness to a life's turning point. For Martin, it was no longer a symbol of despair, but a testament to how far he had come. Growing up in the heart of a bustling city, I never imagined I'd one day seek solace in a small town. My early years were a whirlwind of crowded streets, endless noise, and a family life that teetered on chaos. My parents worked tirelessly to provide for us, but their efforts came at the cost of our connection. As a teenager, I found solace in fixing old cars with my uncle, who owned a garage on the outskirts of town. That's where I first discovered the satisfaction of creating something functional from a pile of rusted parts. Life took a turn when I met Willa. She was magnetic, with a charm that drew everyone into her orbit. At 18, I thought I'd found my soulmate. We married young, spurred by a pregnancy that neither of us was prepared for. My uncle gifted me his garage as a wedding present, and for a while, I believed we were building a life together, but cracks began to show when our ambitions diverged. I was content running the garage, but Willa had grander dreams and a growing disdain for small-town life. Our marriage became a battleground of unmet expectations and simmering resentments. I tried to hold on, believing love and hard work could mend the growing rift. But then came the betrayals, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, and finally, the discovery of an affair. The unraveling wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful process that left me questioning everything I thought I knew. Leaving wasn't easy. By the time I packed my truck and drove away, I had endured years of manipulation and lies. I chose a path of complete reinvention, shedding the identity that had tied me to Willa and the pain she inflicted. My destination was unclear, but I knew I needed distance, both physical and emotional, from the life I'd once cherished. When I arrived in this small town, I was a broken man. My only possessions were a few tools, a battered work truck, and the resolve to start over. This place wasn't paradise, but it offered something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Slowly, I rebuilt not just a business, but a version of myself I could be proud of. Here, I discovered the resilience to face my past and the courage to embrace a future that was entirely my own. I found myself spending many quiet Saturday afternoons in the dimly lit corner of a bar at the edge of town. This unassuming spot became a haven, a place I had stumbled upon during one of my lonely walks not long after relocating here. Back then, I had left behind what I once thought was my paradise: my home, my memories, and my past. Amid the upheaval, this bar transformed into a steady refuge where I could gather my thoughts and regain a sense of calm. Shortly after my arrival, I purchased an old gas station and garage that had been sitting vacant for 2 years. The seller, eager to be rid of the property, quickly accepted my modest offer despite its state of disrepair. While it was far from perfect, I saw promise in the crumbling structure. That deal marked a pivotal moment, a chance to rebuild my life and begin anew, far removed from the betrayal and turmoil I had left behind. One of my first major projects was to expand the property by adding a retail store facing the gas pumps. I envisioned it as a convenient spot for locals, especially after the town's only grocery store closed early each evening. I also modernized the gas pumps, installing a pay-at-the-register system and moving the underground tanks to improve accessibility and safety. The effort was worth it. The upgrades created more parking space and boosted the station's visibility. The changes paid off. The store quickly became a hub of activity in the evenings, bustling with customers from 7 p.m. to midnight, while the gas station ran 24/7. The garage, located behind the main lot, kept regular hours during the week. Saturdays became my personal time, a day I spent in the garage working on side projects, a ritual I came to look forward to. Introducing liquor to the store's inventory initially ruffled some feathers, particularly at the local bar, but my goal was never competition. The station was about building stability and creating jobs in a small town where opportunities were scarce. Over time, the community came to see it as an asset rather than a threat. Farming was the backbone of this place, and many young people left as soon as they could. For those who stayed, the station became a lifeline, a reliable part of daily life. Much of the store's success was due to a woman I hired early on. She had an incredible eye for organization and completely restructured the store's layout, making it more efficient and profitable. Within months, her efforts helped me recover the equity loan I had taken out to fund the upgrades. Fridays and Saturdays became especially busy, with customers stopping by for snacks after a night at the bar. Sundays brought steady sales as well, with cold beer flying off the shelves. This particular Saturday, I was nursing a double shot of Jack Daniels with a glass of ice water and a lemon wedge. Earlier that day, I'd finished a painstaking project, replacing the steering column in an old family truck from the 1940s. It had taken me 8 months to find the right part, and even then I'd had to fabricate some pieces by hand. The truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a legacy, cherished by its owner, who clearly had no plans to retire it anytime soon. Between 4 and 7, the bar was my favorite place to be. By that time, the dinner crowd had dispersed, leaving behind a serene atmosphere. Later in the evening, live music would draw a livelier crowd. The bar had a rich history. Farmers once brought their daughters here for dances and social gatherings. Over the 6 years I'd lived here, I'd built a reputation and formed bonds with the community. People looked out for one another in this town, often giving me a heads up if anything unusual was happening. I had a routine, one visit to the bar each week, always on Saturday, always at the same time. It was my ritual, a chance to reflect in peace before heading home. But this Saturday, my routine was disrupted. My tranquility shattered the moment I saw them walk in. I recognized them immediately. The woman was my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man with her was someone I had once called my son. Their presence didn't stir any fond nostalgia, only the sharp sting of betrayal I'd spent years trying to bury. They were a living reminder of a time when I was blind to the truth, even as it stared me in the face. The young man, had grown considerably. His features were sharper, more defined, and he now bore a striking resemblance to his biological father. Seeing him was a painful affirmation of a truth I had long known but tried to forget. The question that loomed now was why they were here, seeking me after all this time. I watched as they approached the bartender. The woman pulled a photo from her purse, showing it to him. He glanced at it, said something brief, and then they turned and walked out. Relief washed over me as they left without recognizing me. My long, scruffy hair, full beard, and slimmer frame had rendered me nearly unrecognizable. For the moment, my disguise and my peace remained intact. About half an hour later, the bartender approached my table. I leaned back in my chair and asked casually, "What's going on, Tom?" Tom pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and replied, "They were looking for you. Apparently they heard you were living around here and wanted to confirm it. They asked me to give you a message." "What's the message?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "They said Willa has terminal cancer. She doesn't have long and wants to make peace." I let the words sink in before responding. "And what did you tell them?" "I played dumb," he said with a smirk. "I told them I didn't know you. Even looked at their photo and pretended not to recognize it." I nodded, mulling it over. "The woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The boy is her son, the one she passed off as mine for years. Do you think they're telling the truth?" Tom hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe partly, but they're definitely holding something back." I lit a cigarette, tearing off the filter first, and took a slow drag. "That's exactly what I expected. They've always been masters of deception. What they show you is never the full story." Tom gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder before returning to the bar. Left alone, my mind drifted back 7 years to the day I left. I told them I wouldn't be back for 7 years, and they laughed, thinking I was being dramatic. What they didn't realize was that I meant every word. A few weeks before I left, I discovered that the youngest child I thought was mine wasn't. He was my brother-in-law's son. That revelation unraveled everything, sending me on a search for answers that changed my life forever. The proof came from a family member who'd seen it all and referred to them as black witches. women who thrived on manipulation and cruelty. Around the same time, I discovered an insurance policy Willa had recently taken out on me, a policy with a double indemnity clause for accidental end of life. If I died in an accident, the payout would have been $4 million. An elder in the family warned me to leave immediately, and I listened. By the time I drove away, my work truck was packed with everything I valued from our 16-year marriage. I didn't look back. I hit the county road, turned right, and by the time I stopped driving, I was 2 states away. I'll admit, some of this was my fault. I got Willa pregnant when she was 16, and I was an 18-year-old kid who thought he could take on the world. Pressured by my family to do the right thing, we got married that summer. 2 more kids followed soon after. They thought it was all a joke. Even after I left, Willa told our daughters, "He'll come back once he cools off. He just needs to find his sense of humor." But their laughter ended abruptly a few hours later when a deputy from the sheriff's department showed up at their door. "Are you Mrs. Willa Racine?" he asked. When she confirmed, he handed her an envelope. "Ma'am, you've just been served." "What's this?" she asked with a smirk, assuming it was part of some elaborate prank. That changed the moment she opened it. That envelope held the truth they had never expected me to know. Inside were the divorce papers I had carefully prepared with my attorney. We had laid out everything in detail, every asset, every liability. The DNA results were conclusive, proving her affair with my brother-in-law. The petition included explicit evidence, dates, times, places, receipts from their hotel stays, and even photos provided by a supplier who'd witnessed their escapades. Additionally, the legal packet included a sealed letter addressed to her sister. When she opened it, she learned I was suing her husband for unpaid child support, infidelity, and defamation. That's when the laughter truly stopped. I was no longer the punchline of their private joke. I was the one who had turned the tables. To them, I had always been the golden goose. Everything I touched seemed to succeed, and money had never been an issue. As a result, Willa and the kids had lived a life of comfort, never wanting for anything. But that afternoon, Willa discovered just how much control I had taken back. I had sold 3 of my businesses, paid off all our debts, and liquidated the 2 apartment buildings we owned for a tidy profit. I canceled every credit card and removed my name from all joint accounts. I even signed over my half of the house to her and walked away with half our net worth in cash. The only condition? She had to agree to the divorce. In one move, I reduced their monthly cash flow from $10,000 to 0. Willa's sister also learned the hard way that their scheming came at a price. My attorney froze all their assets before they could touch them. By the time the divorce was finalized, they were flat broke. After the proceedings, my attorney called Willa into his office and handed her a check, reimbursing her for a fraction of what they had lost. "Why would you do this?" she asked, stunned. "Because for me, it was never about the money," he replied. "It's about principles, something you and your sister clearly lack. I'm giving you this so you have a chance to start over. I hope you learn from this." Whether or not they learned anything, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was free, and I'd made it clear who had the last laugh. Willa refused to finalize the divorce unless I agreed to meet her face-to-face. That left us in a strange limbo, legally separated but not officially divorced. I saw no reason to entertain a conversation with someone who had deceived me for so many years. For the first time in her life, she was forced to earn a living, and she quickly realized just how quickly money dries up when it's not constantly flowing in. To stay ahead of the inevitable drama, I set up a system for important mail to be forwarded to a FedEx box, which then forwarded it to my work address once a week. I knew Willa and her sister too well to expect them to let go easily. Manipulating emotions and stirring up trouble were their specialties. Revenge wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. In their family, no one was allowed to walk away unscathed. I thought I'd distanced myself enough, but I was wrong. Tammy's appearance was proof their games weren't over. After finishing my drink, I slipped out the bar's back door, avoiding the front in case they were watching. I cut through the empty lot behind the building, wound around some back streets, and finally reached my truck. Just as I unlocked the door, a man stepped out of the shadows. "You're not easy to find, Mr. Racine," he said. "I like to keep it that way," I replied, turning to face him. "What brings you here?" "My name's Peter Edwards," he said. "I'm married to your oldest daughter, Connie." I studied him carefully. That could be a blessing or a curse, depending on whether she takes after her mother. "So, what do you want?" "I came to talk to you," he said. "There are things from the past that need settling." "Maybe so," I said evenly. "But that might go faster if your mother-in-law would sign the divorce papers." "What divorce papers?" he asked, his surprise genuine. "Follow me," I said, motioning to his car. A short drive later, I turned off the main road onto a long gravel driveway and parked in front of a farmhouse. Leading him inside to a home office, I opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder containing the divorce documents. Switching on the printer, I gestured toward the papers. "Help yourself. Make copies of whatever you need." Peter didn't need to know I didn't actually live there. I'd built the farmhouse years ago for the grand dame of our family, hoping she might leave paradise. Peter looked about 25, polished and self-assured, with the kind of demeanor that suggested a good education. Still, I couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be part of Willa and Tammy's latest scheme. He connected to my Wi-Fi and started downloading files onto his laptop. The documents included everything: detailed records, a sheriff's department report, and a letter from Willa's attorney acknowledging receipt of the money owed. The latter seemed to catch his attention the most. As he sifted through the papers, I observed his expressions closely. It was clear that much of what he read contradicted the version of events he believed. "Do you think Connie knows the truth?" Peter finally asked. "That's for you to figure out," I said. "But here's one for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer?" Peter's face hardened. "Who told you that?" "Tammy and Seth were in town today, looking for me," I replied. "That's the story they told the bartender, but I know better. Willa's alive and well, living with her former lawyer. She's in a common-law marriage and expecting his second child." Peter shook his head, his frustration evident. "She told me to find you so she could finalize the divorce. Said she needed it done to remarry." He pulled out his phone and called Connie, switching to speakerphone after a moment. I could hear her voice faintly in the background. "Connie," Peter asked, "did you know your mom lied about the divorce not being finalized?" "What are you talking about?" she responded, confusion lacing her tone. "You know Dad left because he was broke. Mom said he abandoned us. We left not long after. She told us he cleaned out what little we had and skipped town. If it weren't for stepfather, we wouldn't have made it." "I'm sending you a file with the legal documents," Peter said. "Have someone watch the baby and call me back once you've read it." As Peter wrapped up the call, I grabbed 2 bottles of beer from the fridge. Handing one to him, I sat back down. "Why didn't you tell Connie you found me?" I asked. Peter took a sip before replying. "Connie and I have only been married 2 years. She just had our son 3 months ago. Honestly, I don't plan on telling anyone I found you. As far as they know, I'm just working on an investigation." He pulled out his wallet and flashed a badge identifying him as a Paradise Police Department officer. Skeptical, I opened my laptop, navigated to the department's website, and confirmed his credentials. "It was a car accident report from a few months ago that helped me track you down," Peter began. "Connie filed a report about your disappearance, which ended up on the wanted list. Plus, the insurance company's ruling in your favor tipped me off." "So, why didn't you tell Connie you found me?" I pressed. Peter leaned back, his tone cautious. While reviewing the case file, it became obvious there were some unanswered questions. First, what happened to the $250,000 cash Willa was supposed to receive along with the house deed? Second, why is everyone lying about what really happened? "Sounds like you've been fed the same pack of lies I got," I said as his phone buzzed. "It's my wife," Peter said, putting the call on speaker. "Keep quiet." "Hey, honey," Connie said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Where did you get all this? Is it true? If so, we've been lied to for years. Seth doesn't know the truth about who he is, and neither did I. My sister Karen is going to lose it. Mom pushed her away for defending Dad. Now I see it was all part of a bigger lie. Mom and Aunt Tammy gave Dad no choice but to leave." "It's true," Peter confirmed. "I got the records from your father's late lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to find her. Turns out her husband kept backup files on his personal computer. From the records, it's clear your mother was served with divorce papers the same day your father left." I scribbled a note for Peter to have Connie talk to her great-aunt Josie if she was still alive. He nodded as he read it. "Peter, we need to find my dad," Connie insisted. "He suffered enough because of Mom and Aunt Tammy. What happened to the money she got? If she had the house, why did she sell it? And why was she planning to sue Dad for desertion? None of this makes sense." "Have Karen watch the baby for a bit," Peter suggested. "You talk to Aunt Josie and see what she knows. Keep this between us for now. There's a lot more to this story, and it might include some serious fraud. The real question is, why has your mom been bad-mouthing your dad all these years?" After ending the call, Peter turned to me. "Why do you want Connie to speak with Aunt Josie?" Josie knows everything about Willa and George's affair, I explained. She practically raised the family. She always suspected Tammy and Willa were scheming together. Both George and I were pawns, but their ultimate goal was never clear. If that's true, then why? Peter asked. Josie's granddaughter Jody has tried for years to convince her to move in with her, I said. But Josie insists she won't until the whole truth is out. Jody's as private as they come, just like me. Dealing with Willa and Tammy takes a toll. Using and discarding people has been their way of life. Josie was the one who opened my eyes with the evidence she collected. Peter hesitated before asking, "Do you want to know anything about your kids before I leave?" "Not yet," I replied firmly. "I need to be sure you are who you say you are. Given the family history, this could just be another angle in their game. You might want to dig into my lawyer's sudden end of life. If Willa's planning to sue me, she's awfully confident she'll win. That makes me suspicious." Peter's face paled, and for the first time, I saw the realization dawn on him. He was beginning to understand the kind of people he'd married into. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to keep each other updated. I walked him to the door, shook his hand, and watched as he drove away. After cleaning up, I locked the apartment and got in my car. Taking a circuitous route home, I stayed alert to ensure I wasn't being followed. The drive gave me time to process everything. Life had improved significantly since I left my past behind. Did I really want to revisit it? Knowing Willa and Tammy, they wouldn't stop until they had the upper hand. If they were out of money, their greed would only make them more desperate. When I finally arrived home, 2 little arms wrapped around my legs. I scooped up my 3- and 4-year-olds, their laughter filling the air. They were my joy, just like their mother. "Dinner's almost ready," Jody called from the kitchen. "Wash up." I grinned and obeyed. Over dinner, I told her about everything that had happened since closing the store that afternoon. I couldn't have imagined this life 7 years ago when I walked away from paradise. A little over a year ago, I had received a call from Josie asking for my help. Her granddaughter, Jody, needed to leave a failed marriage and start fresh. At the time, I barely knew her. She'd lived out of state on an army base and was 10 years younger than me. But Josie had done so much for me that I didn't hesitate to return the favor. Now, with Jody and our children, I had found the family I never knew I needed. It took me about a week to track down a 2-bedroom apartment for Jody and furnish it with the basics. In a small town, housing options were scarce, but a friend of a friend managed to pull some strings. When I arrived to pick her up, she had already taken the steps to leave her old life behind. She'd quit her job, closed her bank accounts, and packed her belongings. Her husband was away on a 2-week military training exercise, and by the time he returned, she'd be long gone. At precisely 8 o'clock that evening, I pulled into her driveway in a rented U-Haul. Her neighbors quietly pitched in, helping us load everything she wanted into the truck without making a scene. By midnight, we were on the highway, her old life disappearing in the rearview mirror. When curious bystanders asked where I was from, I simply told them it was better they didn't know. As the miles passed, Jody and I started to get acquainted. Somewhere in the middle of the night, her phone buzzed. It was her grandmother. I couldn't help but smile when I overheard Jody say, "Yes, Grandma, Art picked me up. You could have warned me he's got a rugged mountain man vibe. He might actually look handsome if he ever cleaned up." The following day, Josie contacted Jody's lawyer to have all her legal documents forwarded to my FedEx mailbox. Jody warned us both that her estranged husband might cause trouble, and I made sure to take precautions. Over the next few weeks, my suspicions about her situation proved true. Jody quickly stepped into the role of managing my store, and it didn't take long to see how much we needed her. She reorganized everything, resolved staffing issues, and transformed the business. Customers loved her warmth and professionalism, and the store thrived like never before. Jody's ex-husband didn't take her departure well. His escalating threats forced Josie to file a restraining order against him. His behavior led to a dishonorable discharge from the military, and he eventually returned to my old hometown, convinced Jody would show up there. Meanwhile, Jody became the center of attention in our small town. To fend off unwanted advances, she began wearing a diamond ring, a quiet signal that she wasn't available. It gave her the space to rebuild her life. In a matter of weeks, Jody gained the trust of the community, took over the store's bookkeeping, and became indispensable. Everyone accepted her because I vouched for her character. Her sharp wit and natural charm made her a perfect fit, and when asked about the ring or who the lucky guy was, she'd just smile and say, "That's a secret you'll have to figure out." Of course, rumors spread. Before long, people whispered that Jody and I had met online and that she was my mail-order bride. She didn't let it bother her. On Saturdays, when I worked alone, she'd bring me lunch, knowing I'd forget to eat otherwise. Those small gestures deepened our bond. It wasn't long before everyone assumed we were a couple, and invitations to events always included both of us. What had started as two people escaping their pasts naturally evolved into something more. Josie kept us in the loop about events back in paradise. We raised our eyebrows when we heard that Jody's ex had started cozying up to Tammy. Around the same time, Jody's divorce was finalized, marking a pivotal moment for us. That evening, we went out with friends to celebrate. Under the dim glow of the bar's lights during a slow dance, we shared our first kiss. 6 months later, we moved in together. One night, while the boys were splashing in the tub, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I grabbed a small trash bin, stood over the sink, and began shaving off my beard and mustache. By the time I finished, only stubble remained. It felt symbolic, a quiet gesture marking a new chapter in my life. When my boys saw me, they froze, staring in wide-eyed wonder. Grinning, I lathered my face with the shaving soap Jody had given me last Christmas. Then, with exaggerated care, I lathered their little faces too, pretending to shave them. Their laughter echoed through the house. Jody walked in, her blue eyes sparkling with surprise. "Well, look at this! Daddy's starting to look like his boys. What do you think? Should we cut his hair next?" "Yes!" they shouted in unison, their faces lighting up with glee. I chuckled. "Let's leave that to the barber." "Not a chance," Jody said with a mischievous grin. "I'll take care of it before you change your mind." After getting the boys ready for bed, they perched at the kitchen table to watch Jody snip away at my hair. By the time she finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The floor was littered with hair, and I felt like a completely new man. "You've got talent," I told her, running a hand over my freshly trimmed head. She smiled. "Now go rinse off before you get hair all over the house." As the warm water poured over me, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. Life had taken twists and turns I never could have predicted, but here I was, content and grounded. When I stepped out, Jody was on the phone with Josie. She hung up with a worried look. "Grandma says it's time to deal with Tammy and Willow once and for all," she said. Apparently, Connie had just visited Josie and discovered something shocking. The annuities I had purchased for my children, $600 a month each, had never been paid out. Those funds were meant to replace child support, but Willa had intercepted them. It was a wild night, but I couldn't help but grin. If I'd known that shaving and cutting my hair would get this kind of reaction from Jody, I'd have done it a long time ago. For the next week, I became the target of relentless jokes from everyone who knew us. "Who are you and what did you do with Art?" they'd tease. One person even asked Jody if she'd blackmailed me into finally joining the rest of society. Jody, ever quick with a comeback, smirked and said, "I made him promise to shower at least 3 times a week." Most people laughed. A few, predictably, missed the joke entirely. But while we were enjoying lighthearted moments, trouble was brewing back in paradise. Word reached us that I was about to be sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and unpaid child support. Jody and I couldn't help but find the whole idea absurd, believing it was nothing more than a desperate stunt. However, Peter, who had been keeping us informed, warned us it wasn't a joke. The DA had already hired an attorney to represent me, and they were building a solid defense. Peter shared that Willa and Tammy had siphoned off over $48,000 meant for my children. On top of that, authorities were reopening the case surrounding my former attorney's accidental end of life. If evidence held up, Willa and Tammy could face significant prison time. 7 to 10 years was the estimate. Adding to the chaos, Willa's former attorney, now her common-law husband, was under investigation and risked being disbarred. Josie had been quietly working behind the scenes. On Sunday night, she called with an update. All the necessary paperwork would be filed the next day. She emailed me a treasure trove of evidence she'd amassed over the years, including notarized statements, recorded conversations, and the contact information of several attorneys for a countersuit. Among the files was a $2 million accidental end-of-life insurance policy I hadn't even known was still active. Josie had uncovered that Willa had purchased it 6 months before I left. Jody and I spent the entire night combing through the evidence and forwarding everything to the DA's office. By dawn, we were convinced that the lawsuit against me was a ruse, a trap to lure me back to paradise for a setup. Jody immediately contacted one of the attorneys Josie had recommended, sent over the documents, and retained their services with a significant deposit. We were prepared. The moment Willa's legal team filed their lawsuit, our lawyer would respond with a countersuit. That Friday, Jody told me Josie was on her way, with guests. They'd left Paradise under the cover of darkness, stopping at a hotel before continuing their journey. By 7 p.m., 2 SUVs, a Ford Explorer and an Escape, pulled into our driveway. I glanced at the vehicles and felt my stomach tighten. Jody noticed my apprehension and reached for my hand. My truck was hidden in the garage, so no one knew I was there. Yet. "Who's with Josie?" Jody asked, her voice calm but curious. "That's Peter, his wife, my eldest daughter, Connie, with their baby, and Karen, my second oldest," I said quietly. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, lifting our youngest child into my arms. Jody opened the door and we stepped out together as a family. The last person my daughters expected to see was me. Karen froze, tears welling in her eyes before breaking into sobs. I handed my son to Josie and pulled Karen into a tight embrace. Connie, after passing her baby to Peter, walked over and hugged me as well. The weight of the years melted away in those moments. Standing side by side, my daughters had grown into beautiful young women. It was a sight I would never forget. "It's good to see you again, Peter," I said, extending a hand. We introduced everyone, and Jody served the dinner she'd prepared. Roast beef, mashed potatoes with gravy, fresh scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and a warm apple pie for dessert. It was a meal that turned our reunion into something truly special. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my family back. After dinner, as the kids played, we settled into serious conversation. "Art, can I call you Dad?" Peter asked hesitantly. I nodded. "Of course. Dad," Peter continued, "the DA has new evidence. It looks like Jody's ex's car was involved in your lawyer's fatal accident. Investigators have located the current owner and are conducting forensic tests on the paint. If the connection is confirmed, it could lead to manslaughter charges." He paused, then added, "The fire that destroyed your lawyer's office the same night has always been classified as arson. Surveillance footage places Jody's ex at the scene, watching the building burn. Willa and her attorney sealed your divorce documents, likely thinking no evidence remained. But now they've officially filed their lawsuit against you." Jody's eyes filled with tears. "All this time, I thought you were being overly cautious when you brought me here," she said softly. "But now I see you were protecting me. You asked Grandma so many questions, and I thought it was overkill. But now I understand. You needed to know exactly who we were dealing with." Josie nodded. "Willa and Tammy received notice of the countersuit on Thursday. They must have realized I've been helping you. That's why we left Paradise in such a hurry. I knew it wouldn't take long before they tried to maltreat me." "Grandma, your house is ready," Jody said warmly. "It's fully furnished. You only need to bring your clothes." "I packed most of what I need," Josie replied. "Connie is shipping the rest, including my personal items and antiques. I've given her power of attorney to sell the house. It's time for me to leave Paradise, and I'm not looking back." "I'll drive back with Peter and Connie," I said. "We'll rent a truck and haul everything out. It's time to see if our suspicions are correct." "What suspicions?" Peter asked, his expression darkening. "That the lawsuit is a ploy to draw me out," I replied. "Willa still has that $2 million accidental end-of-life policy, and I think they're hoping to cash in. The lawyer's end of life was likely a test run." Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie sat in stunned silence as the realization dawned on them. "They were planning your end of life," Connie whispered, her voice shaking, "even before you left." I nodded solemnly. "That's why I left the way I did. I suspected their motives, but even my lawyer didn't believe me until it was too late." Peter excused himself to make a few critical phone calls. While he stepped out, I sat with my daughters, Jody and Josie, catching up on everything we'd missed in each other's lives. Jody, ever the archivist, dug out some old photos of me from when we first met. Connie and Karen laughed as they admitted they wouldn't have recognized me if they'd passed me on the street. When Peter returned, the room grew quiet as he shared the latest developments. "Willa will be taken into custody right after the holiday," he began. "She's being charged with 3 counts of theft for stealing the annuities meant for her children. We're slowing the process so she won't have a bond hearing for several days." He looked directly at me. "Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul, and make a few stops at familiar places to ensure you're seen, it'll force Willa to communicate from the city jail. Just tell anyone who asks that you're helping Josie pack up her things." Jody's expression turned stormy, and she fixed Peter with a glare. "Are you seriously telling me that the father of my children is your bait to lure my cousins into making a move? What guarantees can you give me that I won't get a call saying I've become a widow before we're even legally married? Before I could respond, Jody sighed heavily, already knowing my answer. You're going to do it, aren't you? Without hesitation. Josie placed a calming hand on Jody's shoulder. Sweetheart, Art has always been this way. He's never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. When you needed help escaping your ex, he didn't think twice. He wants us free of Willa and Tammy's grasp, once and for all. Jody gave a small, reluctant smile. My only fear is that Art will walk right into the lion's den. Josie chuckled. If Art were a boxer, he'd be the undefeated champion of the world. Those witches don't stand a chance. They never see him coming. I spoke up, trying to lighten the mood. Relax, ladies. Peter's got my back. And if anything happens to me, he'll have to deal with Connie. Peter said nothing but gave a firm nod, his face showing he understood the risks. Later, while the women were busy in another conversation, Peter and I spoke privately. The DA believes Jody's ex will act as soon as he hears you're back in town, Peter said. He'll know you helped Jody leave him, and that will set him off. How will he find out? I asked. Peter leaned in slightly. Willa will pass the information to him through a planted informant in the city jail by Thursday morning. If he's caught in the act, do you think he'll confess? I thought for a moment before answering. He's a follower, not a leader, Peter continued. Whenever he's been caught before, he's owned up to it. He sticks with Willa and Tammy because they pull the strings and he doesn't know how to resist. The sign ahead read, Welcome to Paradise, City of Refuge. Population, 34,823. It was a stark reminder of what I'd left behind. Paradise operated like its own little Wild West. The city council had long declared that federal laws didn't entirely apply here. Justice depended on who held the reins, and those in power bent the rules to suit their interests. Progressivism was what they called it, but in truth, the privileged paid the price for the sins of the powerful. 7 years had passed since I'd left, but Paradise hadn't changed much. Main Street had a fresh coat of asphalt, but otherwise it was frozen in time. I decided to make my first stop somewhere guaranteed to attract attention, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar. Thankfully, the diner was still standing, freshly painted but otherwise unchanged. I parked the U-Haul, stepped out, and walked toward the entrance. It was just past 11 a.m., the calm before the lunch rush. If I played this right, my presence would spread through town like wildfire. As I scanned the menu, I noticed familiar faces stealing glances. A few discreetly pulled out their phones. I waited for the server to approach with my coffee. Are you ready to order? She asked. Is today's special still meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes? I asked casually. The server blinked, startled. That's not on the menu. It's only for regulars. Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and fried onions on the meatloaf, I said with a knowing grin. The server looked confused. I'll just let him know myself, I added, standing. Ignoring her protests, I walked through the kitchen's swinging doors. The staff looked up in surprise as Jack, the owner, turned to face me. His face lit up with a smirk. You dumb A, he said. You're a couple of weeks early. Welcome back. He turned to the server. Susan, bring his coffee to the back. Art's eating at the staff table so we can catch up. Jack was the son of the original owner, and we'd been friends for decades. We reminisced until just before the lunch rush. At one point, he had a staff member call his wife, Sasha, to the diner. When Sasha arrived, I stayed seated, waiting for her to notice me. She walked in, looking puzzled. Jack, what's so urgent? She asked. I stood and turned to her. Her face shifted from confusion to shock. What's the matter, little sis? I teased. Didn't expect your mean old brother to come back? Her composure crumbled, and she rushed into my arms. I held her tightly as years of distance melted away. Once she composed herself, Jack asked the staff to give us privacy. Do Mom and Dad know you're back? Sasha asked. No, I replied. Let's keep it that way for a few days. Is this about Willa being taken into custody? She pressed. I nodded. Yes, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'll be staying under police protection while I'm here. They've reopened the case on my lawyer's end of life, and they think it's tied to the arson at his office. The looks on Jack and Sasha's faces said it all. Paradise had been buzzing with rumors about the district attorney's aggressive push to revisit old, unresolved cases ever since his appointment 3 years ago. You're being used as bait, Jack said in a low voice. They're setting a trap. Exactly, I replied. This whole plan is designed to bring them out of hiding. If it works, we'll have answers for the arson, the homicide, and plenty of other crimes. Willa's arrest, combined with my sudden reappearance, will force their hand. "What's driving all this?" Jack asked, his brows furrowing. "A $2 million accidental end-of-life insurance policy," I said simply. "On me." Sasha walked with me to the rental truck, keeping her voice low as Tammy's car pulled into the lot. Leaning closer, she asked, "Where are you staying?" "At Josie's old place," I said. "I'm helping pack up her belongings. She's moved to be closer to her granddaughter and my boys." Sasha's eyes widened in surprise. "Your boys?" I nodded with a small smile. "Jody and I have been together for 5 years. We have 2 boys, 3 and 4 years old." Her mouth opened slightly in shock. "How did you and Jody end up together?" "Josie and I stayed in touch after I left Paradise," I explained. "When Jody needed help leaving her marriage, Josie called me. I helped her move, and she stayed where I lived. We've suspected for a while that her ex might have been involved in my lawyer's end of life in the fire." "Do Willa and Tammy know you're onto them?" Sasha asked. "Not yet," I said, "but it won't take them long to figure it out." Tammy stepped out of her car and approached, her expression sharp and calculated. "Art," she began, her voice tinged with irritation. "You need to drop part of your lawsuit. The DA is planning to charge Willa within the next 2 days." "Unfortunately, my lawyer says that's not an option," I replied. "Willa filed a new divorce petition accusing me of desertion, child abandonment, and unpaid support. Until the court rules on those claims, nothing changes." Tammy's frustration flared. "How are we supposed to bail her out when you've frozen all the assets?" I shrugged. "Maybe your father could help. He could use his house as collateral. After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy glared at me but said nothing. Turning on her heel, she walked away in defeat. I watched her leave, knowing the noose was tightening. "She's dreaming if she thinks their father will help," Sasha said, shaking her head. "He cut ties with them when he learned the truth about Seth's parentage. He said more than once that they're just like their mother." Her words brought a faint smile to my lips. After saying my goodbyes, I climbed into the U-Haul and drove toward Josie's house, stopping along the way to pick up packing supplies. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting. I backed the truck tightly against the garage door, locked it, and went inside. Something felt off. Josie had said she'd leave the curtains open, but they were drawn. Uneasy, I texted Peter to ask if the police had been inside. He confirmed that officers had been through earlier and likely closed them. Somewhat reassured, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. A police officer greeted me immediately, extending a phone toward me. "Mr. Racine, Peter Edwards wants to speak with you," the officer said. I took the phone. "What's up, Peter?" Peter's voice came through, direct and serious. "Looks like the right people know you're back. Tammy already approached you, didn't she? She's probably trying to get you to release the lien on Willa's assets." "She did," I said. "I refused." "Good," Peter replied. "We recorded Willa and Tammy discussing how to adjust their plans. Jody's ex, Brad Press, came up repeatedly in their conversation. Willa told Tammy to inform Brad that you know where Jody is. That should push him into action. And it looks like it did. He showed up less than an hour ago. Willa also told him you're at Josie's house. The knot in my stomach tightened, but I kept my tone even. "Understood. Keep me posted." The rest of the day was uneventful. I spent my time sorting Josie's belongings and packing boxes. Around 6:30 p.m., a pizza delivery arrived. When the driver asked if I was moving, I casually replied, "Just helping a friend pack up." The night was quiet until it wasn't. Around 11 p.m., Brad made his move. Using a tire iron, he jimmied the front door lock and slipped inside. A dim light in the kitchen guided him as he crept forward, a 9mm pistol tucked under his shirt. He found me sitting calmly at the table, sipping coffee. "Hey, Art," Brad said casually, though his voice carried an edge. "Willa and Tammy send their regards. I just need to know where Jody is." Setting my mug down, I locked eyes with him. "Sorry, Brad, I don't share information with butchers or arsonists," he smirked. "What makes you think I'm either?" "You've always struck me as someone who's easy to manipulate," I said evenly. "How much of the $2 million insurance policy on me did they promise you?" Brad's expression faltered. $2 million, he stammered. "They told me it was $750,000. I chuckled darkly. "Did you know Seth isn't even Willa's? He's Tammy's first husband's son. They've been playing games like this for years, manipulating people like you and me. My lawyer figured it out and sued them for everything they had." Brad's face turned ashen. "That's why Willa's claims of desertion were a sham," I continued. "The divorce was finalized ages ago. They just never filed the paperwork. They wanted to lure me back." Leaning forward, I spoke firmly. You're just another pawn in their game. Ask yourself, what's their plan for you? They tried to eliminate me once. What makes you think they won't do the same to you? Brad swallowed hard, realization dawning. I'm screwed, aren't I? You have a choice, I said. Work with the DA, testify against them, and get a lighter sentence. Or stay their pawn and take the fall. Brad hesitated, then slowly placed the pistol on the table. Call the cops, he muttered. I nodded toward the doorway. Brad, no need. They're already here. Connie watched her husband, Peter, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression a mix of focus and relief. Earlier, Peter had told her that her father was staying at Josie's house, but now, a late-night call had pulled them both out of bed. While Peter spoke, Connie headed to the kitchen and put the kettle on, preparing hot chocolate for the two of them. When Peter finally ended the call, a smile broke across his face. Your dad pulled off something incredible tonight, he said. Brad broke into the house intending to cause trouble, but your dad stayed calm, talked him down, and got him to confess everything. The undercover officers caught the whole thing on video. Connie froze, processing what she'd just heard. How in the world did Dad do that? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Peter shrugged. He told Brad a few hard truths, like the real story about Seth's parentage. Then he planted the idea that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out if it was tied to a homicide. I don't even know if that's true, but it was enough to make Brad second-guess everything. Rather than risk life without parole, he decided to cooperate. Aunt Josie always said Dad was quick on his feet, Connie said, shaking her head. But this, I never saw it coming. What does this mean for Mom and Tammy? If Brad testifies in court, your mom and Tammy will face charges for arson, manslaughter, and likely attempted homicide, Peter replied. Without hesitation, Connie picked up her phone and called Jody to share the news. Together, they made a plan. Josie would watch the kids for a few days, so Jody could fly out. Connie would pick her up from the airport once she got the flight details. After coordinating with Jody, Connie contacted her sister to fill her in while Peter got dressed, and left for the station to secure Brad's signed statement before morning. I didn't wake up until 8 a.m. The first thing I did was call Jack to arrange repairs for the front door. True to his word, Jack knew someone. Within half an hour, a handyman arrived and got to work. The new door, complete with fresh trim and a reinforced lock, was installed just as Connie's car pulled into the driveway. Jody was with her. The moment Jody stepped out of the car, tears streamed down her face as she ran toward me. I opened my arms, and she collapsed into them, overwhelmed. Brad was arrested last night, I told her gently. He surrendered without resistance. The officers had everything under control. I was never in any real danger. If that's true, why didn't you call me? Jody asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Why did I have to hear about it from Connie? It was almost 2 a.m. when everything settled, I admitted. I figured I'd call you first thing today. Wrapping my arm around her, I held her close. I promise, I whispered. I'll never put myself in that kind of situation again. After finishing the repairs, we packed Jody's luggage into the car and drove to Jack's restaurant for breakfast. There, we met Karen, Sasha, and my parents. The staff pushed 2 tables together to fit everyone, and my family warmly welcomed Jody. The meal was filled with laughter, stories, and delicious food. My parents were thrilled to hear about our 2 sons, Carson and Hunter, named after my grandfathers. They eagerly scrolled through photos on Jody's phone, marveling at how much the boys looked like me. My daughters shared the story of how they found Josie and discovered I was still alive. As breakfast ended, Peter arrived looking tired but determined. It's done, he announced. Willa and Tammy are in custody, and Brad has confessed to his intent to liquidate Art. He'll face charges for arson and manslaughter. Tammy and Willa will be charged with grand larceny, conspiracy to commit homicide, and fraud. Peter turned to Jody. The DA is working to finalize Art's divorce with the judge who handled the case before. They're pushing for an immediate resolution. Jody's eyes widened. Does this mean Art and I can finally marry? Peter nodded. The paperwork is already with the judge. They're trying to waive Willa's signature, skip the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate. I smiled at Jody. Guess I need to buy a proper ring and propose officially. The table erupted in cheers and laughter. Tears filled Jody's eyes as she leaned into me, overcome with emotion. Before leaving, my parents invited us to dinner. We spent the afternoon packing before heading to their house, where they peppered Jody with questions about her life and how we came together. She recounted how I helped her leave a broken marriage and how we built a life together. The evening took a joyful turn when Peter and Connie arrived with the finalized divorce certificate. "It's official," Peter declared. "You're free." Jody beamed as she shared stories about our life and children. My mother, ever the planner, suggested we have a wedding before heading home. My father pulled Peter and me aside to discuss details over a couple of beers. Peter updated us on the case. "Since Tammy's arrest, more information is pouring in. We've only scratched the surface. The DA's office is flooded with leads." I asked about Willa's common-law husband. "Is he involved?" Peter shook his head. "He might lose his law license, but there's no solid evidence against him. He may end up raising their kids." Connie appeared, grinning. "By the way, Jody's ring size is 6.5. Peter and I headed to the mall, where I bought a stunning 3-ring engagement set. Later, at home, I gathered everyone in the living room. Kneeling in front of Jody, I asked her to marry me. Caught off guard, she gasped, but quickly said, "Yes." Cheers erupted as my father raised his glass. 7 years is too long not to toast my son and his bride. That Friday, we picked up our marriage license at City Hall. Jody was delighted to discover she fit perfectly into Connie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man, while Karen stood as Jody's maid of honor. Even the DA offered to officiate. Jody insisted I upgrade from my usual jeans, so I reluctantly bought a suit at Macy's. On Sunday, in my parents' backyard, we exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony surrounded by loved ones. Even the twins' father attended quietly. The day was simple yet moving, leaving many in tears. After the ceremony, my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. "This isn't a wedding gift," he said with a warm smile. "It's an early inheritance. The rest will go to your daughters." I thanked him and tucked it into my suit pocket, forgetting it until later. Family members recorded the ceremony and sent it to Aunt Josie so she could share in the moment. When asked about our honeymoon, Jody smiled. "After everything we've been through, it'll wait until Grandma is settled. We're planning a week in Florida and California, enjoying Disney with the kids. Family is what brought us here." The next day, as we prepared to leave, I handed Jody a note with a bank promissory for $100,000. The handwritten message read, "Thank you for setting things right. I always suspected the twins were involved in their mother's end of life. Watching them face justice will be satisfying for me and my granddaughters." Jody read it silently and slipped it into her purse. After tearful goodbyes with my parents and daughters, Jody and I climbed into the U-Haul. The drive home felt lighter, free of the burdens of the past. For the first time in years, the road ahead was clear, full of hope and promise for our future.